All right, welcome back to Wisdom for the Church, a late stream at 9:15 on a Thursday. I'm your host, John. I'm glad for those who are here now who will join me later or join me after this is recorded. So yeah, thank you for being here. This video, this stream is going to be, it's called Christian Maturity in a Childish Generation. Christian Maturity in a Childish Generation. And the reason I wanted to do this specific stream is really, I think this is something that this topic is something that I've probably been thinking about on and off for, the better part of my life, honestly, specifically my adult life. But, I believe that we live in a very juvenile, a very childish age, both within the church and outside of the church. And for that reason, how's it going, Vittoriana? Hope you're doing well. Hope you're not a bot. Maybe you are. Who knows? But I wanted to do this stream because I believe that this has been an epidemic for, at least a couple of generations, if not more. And when I say childish, I'm not talking about, advocating for a lack of joy or a lack of laughter or a lack of the ability to have fun in life. I think those are very good things. How's it going, Robbie? How's it going, Angelo? But what I am talking about when I'm talking about childishness, here's my made definition here. We have a childishness as adults in our generation. That is, we are not living in due fear and reverence of God's character. And we are not desiring the wisdom and responsibility that should come with age, right? So we're not stepping into real mature adulthood, into a higher level of integrity and maturity and purity, and honesty, hard work, all these things we'll get into. We're not stepping into that. We are, advocating and constantly excusing degeneracy. We're constantly excusing lowering of standards. And I think it really hurts the next people after us. So again, that's childishness, a definition. An example of this, an example of what I would consider something that's juvenile and just unfitting towards someone who should be in a position of mentorship towards someone below them, like just an adult, someone that would be a good adult in a society, even really a non-Christian one, just a healthy society. And so an example that I saw that was bad would have been probably about 12, 13 years ago now. The Wolf of Wall Street came out, that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, who plays a Wall Street guy. And so he comes on, and that's a big movie. And I saw multiple old people that were excited about that movie. And it's got a lot of foul language. It's got nudity in it. Just drug use, all these things that really the people of God should definitely not be about, and I don't believe are good things that should be seen as acceptable or you should be proud of in society. But we're proud of those things. And so I was, it was very unfitting, to say the least, for seeing like elderly people, not elderly, but 50s, 60s age people that are saying, yeah, let's go, this is going to be awesome, and not thinking a second about it. And it just shows, in my estimation, the degeneracy that was the boomer generation, Generation X, even millennials now, and probably Gen Z, is we've not been fathered, spiritually fathered for sure. A lot of us, have not been fathered by a biological father. I don't exactly know what you're going for, Mini Jim, but glad you're here nonetheless. So yeah, that was a concerning thing, and it's this juvenile sort of lack of growing in wisdom and purity and integrity, and lack of growing in virtue, I think, that defines adults in our society. It's just they're not overcoming pettiness, selfishness, childishness, sexual lusts, and temptations. And I don't want to be naive. I understand that since Adam and Eve fell in the garden, that we have lived in a sin dominated world since that point. But I believe that there are ebbs and flows within different generations. Sometimes things are better and sometimes things are worse. We can see that in the nation of Israel, and I think it's fair to say we can see that in our own nation's history. That right now we are in a very low moral and ethical and even depth of thought era, and that's because we're sort of a generation of adult children. I'm not just talking about millennials or Gen Z. I'm talking about the entire lot of the people that we have. The adults have pretty much left the room. And so what I wanted to do, in this stream are a few things. Number one, define the problem more clearly. What do I mean exactly what I'm talking about? Childishness dominating our society, adult children, and why I think it's terrible. Number two, provide a biblical example of this phenomenon and the terrible results. Number three, provide a counterexample of someone who was an adult in the room and the amazing repercussions that had. And then number four, pretty much as always, what about us? What does that mean for us? And I'm talking specifically about Christians, but also, citizens in our nation who want to care about a better state for our current people, but people after us, right? Because we've been left with and are leaving the next people with nothing of, substance, virtue, and certainly no spiritual substance for most, that is. So getting to the problem, I wanted to look at, this thumbnail. The thumbnail I created, for some may be or may have been confusing, because not all of these people are exactly alike, So why did I choose this kind of random hodgepodge of mostly celebrities and well-known people to represent this childish group of adults that I don't care for and I think are terrible overall examples for society? Why did I choose it? The reason I chose this is the amount of influence each of these people have or have had in recent years, and the high responsibility, therefore, that they should have had regarding truth, purity, courage, integrity, humility, and the like. These faces stem from various arenas, and some act blatantly like clowns. So top left, one from the left, would be Stephen Furtick, a pastor. He acts like a clown on stage. He has brought super soaker squirt guns onto the stage, preaching his church service, mixing in entertainment and just childish games with preaching the word of God on the Lord's very day. Terrible, terrible example of a Christian and of a pastor, of much less, right? So some of them act blatantly like clowns. Others, however, present themselves as mature beacons of light in society, only to disappoint under further scrutiny, right? And so just to review a few of these faces, right, that I'm looking at, for example, you've got in the middle, top middle there, you've got Joe Rogan, right? So, he has some good things to say, but, he is seen as almost the current model of being successful, right? He runs his own podcast. He's his own boss. He's got a lot of clout, and he's on, what does he do with his platform? Some good things, but he smokes weed with Elon Musk on the platform. He, is sexually okay with degeneracy, right? He doesn't bring us to a higher standard in that regard. So Joe Rogan is living out his dream as a child, didn't graduate from some of those things, right? And he's bringing that on, right? And we see it as authentic and unfiltered, right? Because, well, he's not like that old media that pretended, right? So I would prefer not pretending, but also not doing the wrong things either. So it's Joe Rogan, right? On the far right top screen is someone well known to some, Bill Belichick, former coach of the New England Patriots. Why'd I put him on the thumbnail? Because for 25 years, he was, at least in sports, one of the premier symbols, at least, of doing things old school, the right way, and with discipline, even though underneath the surface, he was cheating probably, right? But lo and behold, a couple years ago, it's found that he is actually dating a 24-year-old, probably Instagram model, and he's like 70, which is just an unnatural relationship, right? So someone who is a symbol of discipline and doing things the right way, those types of things, is actually found to be violating that very kind of code. He's found to be a child, right? Once he gets what he wants, all he wants is the hottest person in the room. basically, and all of the principles that he stood for out the door, right? Megyn Kelly, it's mentioned here in the comments. Hi, how you doing, Akila? Megyn Kelly, right? I like a lot of what she says, but some of the things she says, for example, like it's okay in certain circumstances to dress promiscuously, I'll put it that way, as a woman in public. There are certain settings where it's okay, right? And so even she, unfortunately shows herself to be a product of the culture rather than a higher standard of God's natural law and the Bible, by promoting some level, at least, of degeneracy. Right. Of course, I've got Trump on there because the way that he communicates often is as a child. He tweets everything he thinks of. I've got Brian Williams in the middle there because he once was the external standard of media professionalism, right? NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, before that was Tom Brokaw, was probably the standard setter for this is serious news, and we're going to talk about this objectively like adults. But he was found later to be in a scandal. And I could go on and on about each person on this thumbnail. I don't want to bore you, but basically all of them are adults, right? They are of age. They're not 13. And they're the ones setting trends and culture in our society. And most of them wink at degeneracy, right? They wink at degeneracy specifically. And a lot of them, if not all of them, really wink at no fear of the Lord. Even ones like Stephen Furtick, who's a pastor, really his actions would deny that fact. And so you've got people acting like clowns, acting like little children, giving into their just most base desires, while telling you here's the way that we should live when we platform these people. And it's smut, and it's just slop, and we eat it up. And so we have no higher role models that seem to lead us as a people. And there's exceptions, but it's sad that those are exceptions, right? That's the point I'm making, is these are kind of more the rule in many ways. My name is John, Akila. My name is John with Wisdom for the Church. So yeah, that's why I had these random group of people on the thumbnail. Hopefully it makes more sense. People, especially like Megyn Kelly, Brian Williams, that lady Joy, who is on there on the top right next to Belichick. They're supposed to be symbols of integrity and truth and right, but they show themselves to be whiny children in many ways. And that was the point basically of this thumbnail. It's just like, even the ones that you think are like supposed to be, straight and narrow, they show themselves to be lackeys, little children. It's sad. So yeah, that's the agenda. And first was defining the problem, right? So we've got no one almost on a broad perspective that seems to just follow even a basic standard of natural law, like the work of the law written on the heart, right? Like, no, people don't even function by that basic standard like they once did. Like I said, things ebb and flow. We've always been in a sin-stained world since Adam and Eve fell in the garden, but that doesn't mean things are not worse sometimes and sometimes better. And I think it's been worse in terms of quality of our ability to think and reason as image bearers of God over the last 70, 80 years. And I think, we all understand that. I think all of us have probably less of a moral grounding than our great-grandparents did in many ways. In other words, for the things that really matter, adults that are supposed to be leading and making the next group of children into adults, we are not serious about the things that matter. And I think this is a real issue. I really do. Even the ones that I agree with some things on, they still will wink at a lot of sin, right? Like Megyn Kelly or Trump or whoever. Think about this. In the book of Proverbs, this is down toward the bottom here on the screen. The book of Proverbs is a Solomon training his son for godly manhood, basically. That's the book of Proverbs. And these themes in the book of Proverbs, I believe, are universal themes, meaning I think to some degree, you don't actually have to be specifically a Christian to actually have at least some understanding that these are good things, right? You will not live them out as fully as a Christian would. I completely understand that. But, there are certain things that the work of the law, the natural law, the 10 commandments are written on the heart. And a lot of the Proverbs, are applications, at least, of the 10 commandments of if you live this way, this will happen, right? And so here are some of the chief themes of the Proverbs. Fear of the Lord is the chief of all values. Fear of the Lord is the chief of all values, right? Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, the beginning of wisdom. This entire book of Proverbs is a book of wise sayings, right? And they're not promises necessarily, but they're proverbs. Here's generally what's true in the way that God has made the world. And I am looking to have you, son, live in a way that gives honor to God and helps you and helps others, right? So fear of the Lord is the foundation of all of these things. This very book of wisdom, it says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you miss that, all these other things are going to, they're going to fall. Yeah, you're probably right, Chad. And the book of John, or First John's clear, right? So they're only children of God and children of the devil. So ultimately, if someone's not serving Christ to some manifestation or another, they are ultimately serving Satan. It's just a matter of in what way, right? Because they don't know Christ, who is truly the light. And yet sometimes some will be worse than others, right? In terms of how that shows itself. And as our consciences become more seared, the more we sin. Jonathan Bevins, of course, says such a mature subject. Of course, yes. And I'm such a smart person, right? As you'd say. Oh, yeah. Amen. Amen. Absolutely. There's redemption, Aquila. So even if someone doesn't live out the book of Proverbs, Christ saves from that. So let's praise the Lord for that. So some more of the big themes of Proverbs. So fear the Lord is the chief of all values. Another big theme is the importance of sexual selectivity or purity. In other words, channeling your sexual desire in the context of marriage toward higher purposes, toward godly purposes, right? Toward the household, toward the things that will build in God's world rather than destroy your own body and your own soul, right? We know the proverb about the adulterous woman, and there's beetles around me, so if they hit my face, that's a slight little spiritual warfare, I suppose. Ruler and principality of this atmosphere that I'm in right now. So sexual selectivity or purity, verbal restraint, in other words, controlling your tongue, right? A kind answer turns away wrath. We see that in the book of James, and the rest of the Bible in some way or another. Just knowing when to say something, when to not say something, how to say something. Sometimes when a hard word is needed, and sometimes when a soft word is needed. Seems to be a lost art. In our culture, we're very soft a lot of times, quite honestly, on what is evil. And we're hard. The only thing we're really hard on is when someone is seeking to be forceful against evil principles. So we know how to be harsh. It's just often in the very wrong direction, right? It's when scoffers are being called out. That's when they'll be very harsh, right? Having an abundance of counselors, wisdom and abundance of counselors, another massive theme. Just the basic principles of hard work and the benefits of that, as well as humility. Before pride comes before the fall, right? And there are more themes in the book of Proverbs, but these are some of the major ones that Solomon is training up his son for godly living and godly manhood and godly adulthood, we might say. Fear the Lord, and because of that, sexual purity, verbal restraint, having an abundance of counselors, hard work, humility, right? Working smart as well. These types of things. And, if you look at that list of just these major themes, some of them, someone might say, okay, well, that's good. Yeah, it's good to have, it's good to work hard, right? Some people might say that. But I think by and large, a lot of these things, especially items 1, 2, and probably 3, are scoffed at a lot of times in our culture and in the media, in like corporate settings, friend groups, whatever it might be, TikTok, now like new media. These things are scoffed at a lot of times, right? So, and again, that gets me back to having a group of juvenile adults. There are some people I will agree with, and they will agree with some of these to a degree, but even some people like a Megyn Kelly who have their heads on straight to some degree, and are well spoken, way more than I am in a lot of ways. They will still scoff at a couple of major tenets on this list, such as sexual purity and sex being designed only for one context and to be enjoyed in that context to a level that we couldn't even imagine outside of that context, right? Because God is a good God, right? And so that I think is the big one in our day, is you take someone's sexual liberty away or challenge it. I mean, you might as well just give them a shotgun to shoot you. We're that cooked. We really are. That's one of the big values in our day is self-expression and sexual self-expression. And it's weird, being someone who's on politically the right, something that the right is doing now, not even the left, but the right. They are lamenting the fact that what happened to young people, they're not having sex anymore. And, in one way, it's like, well, that's good because they're not having extramarital sex or premarital sex. They're not fornicating. What they are doing is watching a bunch of pornography and other weird stuff, right? So they're just probably replacing. But number two, I think what's often not talked about, with that kind of a thing is the reason they're not having as much sex is because for 60 years, this sexual revolution has so degraded our ability to understand what sex is really about. And we have become so jaded by the fact that sex does not lead to actual happiness, but usually just leads to more brokenness and more confusion, and more broken relationships because we're dependent on one another, but we're not about marriage. And so we end up breaking it off. That I think people are just tired and we're uninteresting and we're kind of like cyborgs now. We're kind of like non-playable characters. And so the younger generation has been so hit by that. I'd probably have to think about that more, but I think that's what's going on is just like, sex outside of its natural context has kind of burned itself out, right? And so we're just as degenerate as we were, 30 years ago. It's just expressing itself in almost an even more pathetic way. To be honest, I think that's what's going on. And so people on the right, it's sad because they're lamenting the fact that people aren't having more, extramarital sex or premarital sex. They're not mourning the fact that the reason this is happening is because we left where sex is supposed to be anyway. We left that standard and it's degraded. They're not lamenting that. They're lamenting the fact that why aren't people out like cats and dogs like they were when I was in high school? Again, this concept of children raising children, right? It is a little slightly better when they were adult or when they were kids, but not much. And it's sad that people on the right, or that's their best they've got, is we've got to get back to the way it was in 1997. It's very sad. So, these values, which are principles of godly living and successful living, to live in this world, are scoffed at in many ways, even by people that are have some level of common sense on them. And I wanted to provide a biblical example, right? So not only just the general problem defined, but where does it happen in scripture? All the time when people sin, of course, but I think a great example would be Rehoboam and Rehoboam's folly. Basically Solomon's son, post Solomon's death. And this might get a little lengthy, but it's worth it. This scripture is worth it because I think it highlights some very, very important principles about what happens, the fork in the road, when someone is entering adulthood, or in this case, manhood, and it's going to set the course for a long time and have repercussions. So here's the story, 1 Kings 12. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. And as soon as Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard of it, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from Solomon. Then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father, that is Solomon, made our yoke heavy. Now, therefore, lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke upon us, and we will serve you. And he said to them, Rehoboam said, "Go away for 3 days, then come again to me." So the people went away. And so we've got a if this were a movie, this would be a very important, establishing scene. You've got the new king, the up and coming king, is about to start his reign. And people are wondering, what is he about? How is he going to rule? Is it going to be good for us, bad for us? Is it going to be selfish? Is it going to be hard? What's it going to mean? And then he says, "Go away and I'll think about what you've said." So you've got this young up and coming king. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon, his father, while he was yet alive, saying, "How do you advise me to answer this people?" And they said to him, "If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them and speak good words to them when you answer them, then they will be your servants forever." But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. That's huge. That's why it's in yellow. And he said to them, "What do you advise that we answer this people who have said to me, 'Lighten the yoke that your father put on us'?" And the young men who had grown up with him said to him, "Thus you shall speak to this people who said to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy.' My little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions." And if we go down to the very end, down in 15 there, just to skip for the sake of time, a few verses. "So the king did not listen to the people, for it was a turn of affairs brought about by the Lord, that he might fulfill his word, which the Lord spoke by Ahijah the Shilonite to Jeroboam the son of Nebat." So the Lord is sovereign even when people are doing evil. That's another principle in here. But still, Rehoboam is responsible for his evil. And what was his evil? His evil was forsaking wise counsel, particularly wise counsel of older, more mature, seasoned, and seemingly more virtuous and godly men, and going instead for, the scoffers, the young mentality that said, "Make it easy street for yourself, Rehoboam. Don't care about this people. Tax them." This would mean like tax them to death, build up a lot of wealth for yourself, and let the consequences be where they may. So Rehoboam, being the new king, Solomon's son, people don't know how he's going to act or rule, and so they're trying to influence him, both the people and different sets of counselors. They're wondering what is he going to do. And so Rehoboam, instead of listening to godly men, listens to basically adult children like himself. That's basically what happens here. Right. And so he took the fast food approach rather than timely, wise, long-standing principles. And what was the results? If you look at the way that it would go the rest of the Old Testament, the result of Rehoboam's one decision, one foolish, childish decision in which he would double and triple down, which often happens with sin, was a divided kingdom. Because of this decision and subsequent things, a divided now northern and southern kingdom ensued. And so he cut the people, not fully in half because it wasn't exactly 50-50, but basically cut the people of Israel in half. You divided us by your stupidity and your short-sightedness and your selfishness, Rehoboam. It was a resulted weakened kingdom, and it was therefore a weakened people. And because of these things, a divided kingdom, a weakened people, a weakened kingdom, it obviously, because of that, would be a greater chance for godlessness and evil to grow, right? If evil has a better chance of surviving when there is less threat to stop it and speak truth to it, right? And give force to it, right? And so that's what happened, basically. And so this one childish event led to catastrophic consequences down the line. And the way that I believe that translates to our day is in many, many, many different ways, but one of which is the sexual revolution, I think is huge. We are still reaping the benefits or lack thereof of what our grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever, decided when it came to what really is the meaning of marriage, what's the meaning of a successful life, what's the meaning of sex, what is the purpose in my life? These kind of things all, tie together. We are still reaping the terrible consequences of live free and let everyone love however they want to. Marriage is just some restrictive piece of paper, right? You can probably tie a line, if you think hard enough, between that and gender confusion. You can probably tie a line between the sexual revolution and the massive divorce rate, of the last 30, 40, 50 years. You can then tie a line between that and the fact that people just don't get married anymore, right? You can tie a line there. You can tie a line, so all of these things, you can tie a line from that all the way to these days when basically dating, if we want to call it that, is just a meat market of online apps to, at best, hook up with someone, unfortunately, and at worst, just get some dopamine hits because you saw that someone liked you, right? That's a phenomenon these days. It's unfortunate, but, I think these things, they work, and that's where the logic goes. And so a childishness that went on 60, 70 years has led to an even worse kind of childishness decades later. I say it in a lot of my streams, but I think it's definitely true. The book of Judges is extremely instructive when diagnosing a nation, because the book of Judges, if you look at it, is essentially a downward spiral overall from bad to worse. And it's capped by this phrase constantly spoken: everyone did what was right in their own eyes in those days. And things just get worse over time. And the Lord will rescue them, but then they'll rebel. Rescue them, but then they'll rebel even worse. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And I think we've lived that kind of a model in the U.S. and the West for decades and decades, if not more, probably, than a century. And it all results from sin, of course, but sin in some ways is a type of childishness. And when I say childishness, I'm not talking about the childlike faith that Jesus commends. I'm talking about the selfish, mere base and fleshly desires at the expense of what God says is good, right? It's running from that which is higher and what God says is good for the little reward right now. It's sort of the ice cream for dinner mentality. I want ice cream for dinner. It's better than the slow home cooked meal that doesn't taste as good as ice cream. But the downside is you're going to have less nutrients in your body. It's going to end up costing you. You're going to gain a bunch of weight. You're going to be more tired, lethargic, and eventually you're going to realize, oh, this wasn't good for me. But again, I screamed for ice cream, and so I got it. Right? We're wailing children, wailing for our sexual pleasure these days, in my estimation. And so Rehoboam, to me, even though it wasn't a sexual thing, I think Rehoboam is a great example, though, of that kind of a thing happening. Just fork in the road. Can I go with sound, tried and true, godly principles to guide where I'm leading this nation? Or will I go somewhere else? Well, this guy, I was in a frat with him, and we did X, Y, and Z together. And this old school guy, what does he know, right? And there you have it. An entire generation and more destroyed, essentially, because of that childish decision. And most of us won't have decisions as quite as catastrophic as Rehoboam. We're not the Israelite king. I will not be president. I probably won't even be a president of a company, right? But in small ways, I definitely think it's instructive for us of what happens, right? And Proverbs is clear on that. Proverbs is clear that what happens when you go the way of the wayward woman, nothing good. It'll be your life. And yet what happens when you invest in a godly woman? Proverbs 31, more blessing than you could imagine. Kind of crazy if you really think about it. And I think a lot of it comes down to obviously sin, but even just childish based desires or not, right? But then there is a counterexample, in my estimation, one counterexample of many, and that would be David. So if we think of Rehoboam as childishness personified, David is the opposite, not in perfection, because we know that he still sinned and still gave into fleshly, youthful desires, lust for Bathsheba and arranging a murder. But in terms of his general character, as it's presented in the scriptures, we see a few things that mark David's maturity in opposition to childishness. So David had a fear of God. That's number one, right? Fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. David's fear of God is evidenced the first time we really hear about him in the Old Testament, and that's in the story of Goliath, right? Or one of the first times. So the Israelites are shaking in their boots, the Hebrew people. There's this Philistine that cannot be stopped, and everyone's just standing there scared, including Saul the king. And David is wondering, almost naively, it seems, what's going on? Why is no one taking on this guy? What's up? What are we doing? Um, and he essentially mans up in front of Goliath and in the presence of the Israelites, and he trusts in the Lord, and probably by supernatural power of the Lord, to be honest, kills Goliath. He kills the giant. And it took fear of God had to be present in David, a reverence for God's name being tarnished by virtue of his people being, plundered and made fun of. By extension, that's because that's God's people. Therefore, God is being attacked and made fun of. You might say his name is being brought down low. David had to have a fear of God to recognize, one, this is going on, but two, recognize something has to be done. God's name cannot stand in this light that they're putting it in, and we're letting them put it. Something has to happen. Something has to happen. So we had a fear of the Lord, and praise the Lord for that with King David. Think of David in contrast with Saul. Saul, another example, honestly, of an almost laughable sort of evil sort of childishness. Again, not the childlike faith, but the whiny sort of selfish childishness, the envy. Saul is envious, power-hungry, childish, like I said. Think about the way he was jealous of David. David, though fallen and prone to wander, was generally pure, driven toward higher and godly goals, and showed himself a mature man in sparing Saul's life in the cave. Right? And so there's a great contrast in David, man of God, and Saul, whiny baby who's running from God, in those stories with David and Saul. Right? Saul is mad because David gets singed about for killing his 10,000 and Saul only his thousands. Saul starts to go insane. Saul seeks to kill David, right? And one of the stories is that Saul is looking for David, and David has a small army with him, and Saul wanders into a cave alone. I think it was to relieve himself. David could have easily killed him, the text says, essentially. But David doesn't. I think he cuts off a piece of Saul's clothing and then later reveals to Saul, here, look, I could have gotten you, but it's not my place. The Lord's will is what will be done here, and only the Lord takes this life, right? And so that shows great restraint by David to have this sort of mentality to Saul, who was trying to kill him. And I'm no expert in ancient culture and ancient king culture, but I would imagine that if you've been anointed by God as future king and you're not yet king, and Saul's the current king and he's trying to kill you, most other men, if they were not grounded in a fear of God and a knowledge, in this case, of a real plan of God, would just cut Saul off as soon as he could, off with his head. It took real godly maturity for David not to give into the immature, the foolish, the quick, the easy desire of just killing Saul, because that wasn't God's will at that time. But Saul, I think if you just read the accounts of David and the Samuel and 2 Samuel, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, you will easily see that Saul is like a little whiny baby, really, who's not getting his way, as is often, Nebuchadnezzar, I think, in Daniel. But that contrast, I think, is very instructive on godly, real maturity, and then a juvenile mentality of getting what I want when I want it. And it's always about me, and my just easiest desires that I want. And that's what's going on with David and Saul. A great contrast, I think, in a doctrine of adulthood versus adult children. And how about David and Jonathan? A model of friendship, covenant friendship. This friendship, David and Jonathan, was as deep and serious as it got. It was iron sharpening iron, it was promise keeping, and it was generationally defining, because there would be benefits toward Jonathan's family as well as David's. And so this was well thought out and long lasting too. And that's another reality of being a real mature, adult, is thinking with foresight and not really just thinking of what can I get because I want it right now. But it's thinking about what would be best for, the people around me to honor God with their precious lives and time, right? And David and Jonathan did that. Jonathan, a great example as well of, a godly maturity, could have easily fallen into the type of jealousy that Saul fell into. Jonathan is Saul's son. Jonathan probably, if he were selfish, if he were thinking in sin terms rather than God terms, could have easily thought, why am I letting this non-family member become king? I'm the rightful heir to this throne. And so this took some real character. And I thank the Lord for that, because without Jonathan having a real godly maturity and character, we wouldn't have David, who was, a type of Christ and who Christ would come from. It's incredible. And so that's a positive example. And David, being a fallen man, still sinned. Jonathan, I don't think we have an account of it, but we know because he's not Jesus, he still sinned. And so I'm not talking about sinless perfection, but in general, these men are examples of righteousness, and particularly from the lens of adulthood, maturity, rather than being a juvenile little whiny child who just wants his own way. And I believe that that's what we are a lot of times these days. Our generation of adults, we were fatherless. We were raised fatherless, spiritually speaking, a lot of times, sometimes actually. And we've raised people almost fatherless. This is like 3-4 generations long now. Blind leading the blind. Which again, blind leading the blind is why, Taylor Swift is seen as a female icon, when in fact she's essentially just a promiscuous woman with a half-decent voice who never wants to grow up. At least she's getting married now, finally, something positive, after, ruining her own purity and the purity of many others along the way, unfortunately. Right? A terrible example of womanhood or adulthood, and yet here's what we have, all these types of people. So that's that. David's a great example, though. I really do think he is. Which gets me to, well, what about us? Right? So we've talked about here, the general problem is just these wisdom principles and proverbs not to be found today. Right? They don't give us enough dopamine. I don't think. These things are just not interesting enough to us. We're past these things, right? We want what we want, and when we want it now. But we get an example of this Rehoboam and the terrible consequences that we often don't think through. A better example, or a counterexample, David, God's servant, man after God's heart. Biblical maturity, godly maturity, maturity that we can look to as an example. And then we get to, what about us? And so in my spiel here, my talk, I don't have any groundbreaking advice regarding what the youth would say, adulting, to make it a verb. But there is a reminder to teach the gospel, live the gospel, and follow the commands of Christ with integrity in a way that will shine light on dark situations. There is an example, or there is a reminder to teach the gospel, live the gospel, and follow the commands of Christ with integrity in a way that will shine light on dark situations, and sometimes will convince and convict those who are acting like kids to wake up. And that's prayerfully what's going to happen in the next few years. I really pray, you hear about younger people going to church again. I pray that they will be serious about the things of God and not just the forms or the feel of you're in something old and traditional. I feel like that's partly what's just going on. It almost is just the surface level forms rather than the actual substance and function of godliness. We will see. But I do think there will be some good fruit there from some who have returned to Christ. And again, I'm not talking, when I'm talking about this, of not having joy, not having laughter, not having comedy. All of these things are totally in play in God's economy. So I'm not Mr. Debbie Downer here. We shouldn't just be sitting in leather seats smoking cigars all the time. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about sin and winking at short-sightedness, right? And not thinking about the people that are going to come after you. For example, I've mentioned it before. I think it's childish to think just like, well, this illegal migrants. I don't know what I'm allowed to say on this platform, but illegal migrants are coming in. Well, it's not really going to affect me because I have this job and I have this qualification. Well, great. Thank you for knowing that you're going to be okay. Because a child always thinks, well, as long as I'm okay, I've got my ice cream. I guess it doesn't really matter who else gets theirs, right? An adult way to think would be, but what precedent am I setting for the people coming below me? Is it actually a good principle that we're setting in place? Is it moral or is it immoral? If it's immoral, regardless of what I think the results are going to be, it should be off limits and we know it's going to hurt. The only question is how exactly it's going to hurt. If it's not moral or immoral, but it's just a wisdom principle, well, maybe we can think through and use the abundance of counselors to try to figure out, like, well, is this good or is this bad? Will there actually be helpful for people long term, or will it just be a quick little solution? Yes, absolutely. You can email me. Yeah. Here's my email. Aquila. Yep. Okay. Emailing because I'm getting a t-shirt idea for the store coming up. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So that's that. Appreciate that. Here's my email if anyone wants to email me a t-shirt idea for the Wisdom for the Church, Wisdom for the Merch. Some people say I should call it. We'll see. And getting back to, can't remember exactly where it was here. Getting back to David, right? So what about us? What about us is the kind of thing we're on now. Consider David. Matt Chandler famously said that we as Christians are not David, right? He yelled it in a sermon. You're not David. You're not David. And in one sense, I agree with Matt Chandler that that's true. David was a king supernaturally raised up by God to continue the Hebrew line and serve as a type of Christ. A type of Christ in that he was a ruling king that protected and saved, from Goliath, for example, his people. David defeating Goliath pictures the future perfect King Jesus, who would defeat the great enemies of sin, death, and Satan for helpless sinners. We, in the example of David and Goliath, are more like the Hebrew Israelites in many ways, the shaking in their boots or shaking in their sandals Hebrews, than we were David, right? We're just being passively rescued by someone that God has raised up rather than doing the saving ourselves, right? David is a type of Christ because Christ saves. We don't. We understand that because we're sinners, we're fallen, we're prone to cowardice, and we don't have the credentials to save because we're sinners. In another sense, we are David in the same way that we are Moses, we are Daniel, we are Abraham, we are Isaac, we are Jacob, we are any other saint who has followed God. In this way, the Old Testament and New Testament saints serve as examples for us. They really do. The cloud of witnesses language in Hebrews 11 and 12 exists for a reason, right? That hall of faith, Hebrews 11, David's in there, Abraham, Moses. This exists for a reason. We are to emulate these men and women of great faith. So in some way, then, we are David, right? You're not David. Yes and no. You are not David in the sense that he was a type of Christ. You are David in the sense that you are a servant of the Lord, called to take risks for God's glory and to give up your childish and sinful desires for the sake of the kingdom, to put those to death. And David was not always a great example of that. So we're emulating his faithfulness, not his sin, because all people of God will still have indwelling sin. It's clearly biblical teaching. We are to emulate these men and women of great faith in Hebrews 11 and elsewhere, including David. David, in many ways, served as the antithesis of Saul and Israel's future wicked kings. The result of David standing for God and thus standing for truth, honor, purity, and so on led to a blessed kingdom with noticeable blessings as opposed to other areas. So I think we're in a very interesting spot with all of this in our current landscape, right? The left has been insane most of my life, to be honest, and are the embodiment of adult children in my estimation. Whatever you want to do regarding what you call gender, you do it. However you want to present yourself in public, present yourself. Whatever you want to do with, quote, your body is your choice. The list goes on and on. Care about, more of the illegal migrant more than you do your next door neighbor, even though that violates a basic category and basic prioritization, all these sorts of things. But more and more on the right, as we continue down a godless path, we also embrace a type of childishness that I think we have to turn the tide on. Right? So we as Christians, I think, have to be uncompromising in real biblical standards, particularly, I think, in areas of fear of God, sexuality, what is true religion versus false, these types of things, how to raise children. So when someone on the right or right adjacent is all about, you can do what you want, in the bedroom, for example, as long as it doesn't affect your work or something like that. To a degree, I understand that, but we should be able to say, well, wait a second. Do we not think that the other is going to affect, one is not going to affect the other? Do we really think we can compartmentalize something as combustible as sex, right? That's just foolishness. That's stupid. It contradicts everything we know, right, about how, sex works and how it affects every part of our being. And so we should be able to live as lights in a warped and crooked generation, to quote, I believe it's Philippians language. And so I think we have the opportunity to build things together within our churches and making associations with other like-minded churches or ministries or whatever, like a David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan, though they were profoundly younger than Saul and probably Saul's counselors, they serve as a much more shining and long-term example of how to live life in a way that honors God than did the people that should have been more mature and godly and wise and virtuous, and all these types of things than they were. And it wasn't all the time that David was just preaching about these things, right? He was more living based on action. And I think Christians in our day have a great opportunity to emulate that. Not being just sour people. I'm not talking about that, but I am talking about being serious about the things that God is serious about in a way that is gentle and seasoned with salt to those that are unbelievers and ungodly, because you're going to rub shoulders with those who are unbelievers and ungodly, of course, all the time. Every day you breathe air, that's going to happen. But I believe that the example of David and Jonathan and doing things in a way that is with other Christians so that it shows a shining light to other people makes a massive difference, right? I've mentioned this on another stream in terms of just a basic principle of life that I think we just forget sometimes, is the strength in numbers. And God is not opposed to using numbers and using a lot of people who do things in a similar way to get his point across, right? How will they know how will they know you are my disciples if you love one another, right? It's not just a personal silo that the disciples were living in, but they were caring for one another with a supernatural type of care and love and accountability and all these types of things. And so that it shows the world that there is a difference and that there is a standard also that they are not measuring up to. And that's really, really, really important. And so again, I'm not just talking about just railing against degeneracy all the time, although there is a place for railing against degeneracy to convict, right? And we should have good laws in place, all these types of things I've talked about in plenty of the different streams that I do and videos. But even just the positive example of life that speaks a witness and sometimes will just silence scoffers based on the results of how life goes, I think should have a real place and does have a real place in the Christian life in terms of impacting the world for Christ and even leaving a culture in a little bit of a better place for the better result of our children, right? The last thing that I want to produce would be a type of adult that plays the part, but then when it really comes down to things like basic foundations of how God has made the world, like the meaning and purpose of marriage, the foundation of family and household as a flourishing agent for society, these types of things, winks at any sort of deviation from that. I don't want to be that type of adult. I want to be the type of adult prayerfully that can gently yet lovingly say, this is a fire you're playing with and it is only going to destroy, right? Shacking up with someone who is not your spouse in a way that is sexual is only going to destroy and only going to confuse, even if it leads to some happy days for you, right? We can say that, right? Because again, it's not just about the two people. It's about the ones that they're inevitably going to produce and then potentially kill or raise in a far less than ideal environment. There's a word for someone who's born out of wedlock, right? And it's no fault of their own. And so we are kind of a generation or two or three generations of that type of person, a generation of children born out of wedlock. We're a born out of wedlock people, and we're morally confused, right? And someone has to be able to say and model, okay, yes, it worked for you and you turned out, quote, okay. But the point of us living on this earth is not just that you turn out okay and things go okay. The point of us being on this earth is to honor God. And he has revealed how to honor him and know him through the scriptures, the Old and New Testament. Ultimately, none of the things that I'm talking about, being mature and being adult and all these sorts of things and spurning what is, juvenile and just self and now, none of these things will rescue us and make us right with God. And that's because we still sin and God's standard is perfect. We need a perfect savior, and that's Jesus. But the values do in fact help those around us and manifest God's love to them, right? So when we fight for the true meaning of marriage, and when we fight for families to stay together, even when it's hard and even when it's not preferable for the two parents, I think we're doing a noble service because we're possibly keeping a child from living in an environment where they're torn between two divorced people that should not have divorced, for example, right? I've mentioned this many times. I'd love to hear if anyone's watching now what you think of this, but I think another part that I've mentioned of being kind of an adult child is how short-sighted and quick to just buy the latest and greatest thing we are. That's kind of a childish thing to do, right? I have to get the newest iPhone or I have to get the newest car, even though it'll stretch me and I'll be on a loan for 7 years or whatever it is. This is not a wise way to think about using the very limited and very decreasingly purchasing power, money that you have these days. That's definitely worth thinking about in my estimation. But yeah, you guys can let me know what you think about that. I think that's a big part of the short-sightedness is the big part of the juvenile culture, the childish culture we live in. Is just we really run from long-term, well-thought-out, disciplined decision-making, and we really run to what is quick and easy and will get us the quick hit that we need, whether it be the quick money that's made dishonorably or whether it be the quick dopamine on the phone or whatever, or even the quick drug hits. Yeah, definitely is. Consumerism and the tech boom. You're right, because that goes, hand in hand. Consumerism, and then leads to the tech boom, which now we're worse than we were 20 years ago, even myself probably included. Oh, I'm sorry if I'm echoing. I apologize if I've been echoing. But hey, that's okay. K. It's okay. K. Yeah. So again, these people on the thumbnail, a couple more that I've not mentioned. One would be bottom right next to El Presidente. I think his name is Todd White. He's a pastor. But basically, or maybe it's Mike Todd. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Maybe it's Mike Todd, as actually his name, but he dresses very effeminate and sometimes just in clothes, even if it's not effeminate, that just don't fit him, right? Like pants that are too short. I think these are little things, but I think they go a long way too. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's sin or not sin, anything like that. But just in general, I think another sign of a childish generation is like a group of people, as a generation in general, when they're coming of age, that will just not wear clothes that like fit them somewhat normally, right? And I get that styles change, and I get that material of clothes change and all that, right? But it's so interesting to me. So about 15 years ago, there was the boom. Like there was this boom of skinny jeans, right? Everyone was wearing skinny jeans, but they were very concerningly like skinny. They were way too tight for any normal person, to be honest, male or female, really. It just looks unnatural. They are form fitting. I see, your members, so to speak. And now it's sort of weird. It's gone the exact opposite direction. Now everything is very baggy. Like you've got to wear pants that are 3 times too big for you. And I do sound, I know, like an old guy or railing at this younger generation. I'm really not old. But it would seem that a more commonsensical way to dress would be what generally fits the way my body looks without being risque. That's so maybe I should wear pants that fit and a shirt that fits. Just kind of spitballing here, right? Not as important as all the moral principles we've talked about, but still, worth thinking about. On the top left, you've got Theo Vaughn. He's a comedian, and again, comedian. There's a great place for comedy, I think, in the way that God has made us. But on his cast, I've heard him talk about like casually like smoking the white stuff before. And that's a terrible example, for someone younger, but they're gonna latch onto that in different ways, even if he's kind of joking around. And so yeah, these people here in the thumbnail, to me, they just represent sort of a broad spectrum of adults who have not latched onto higher virtue and have kept many of the things that we would say are childish and selfish and that we need to prayerfully grow out of. And that's the point, right? Bill Belichick, like I said, he's 73 or something, dating a 24-year-old. Unnatural. That's just a little kid who's addicted to his, pleasure. The one to the left of him, Joy, the MSNBC lady, is addicted to the victimhood mentality that she spitefully spews, particularly at white people in the U.S., like a little child railing at the top of her lungs that she didn't get, dessert after dinner or something. Constantly going after a system that allegedly favors constantly one group of people, when that very system has things in place on the books that would actually sinfully favor someone that looks like her. That's childish. It's not thinking in mature ways. It's not thinking in a way that would actually help people. It's muddying the waters and hurting and doing injustice rather than justice. It's a childish, me first, selfish, wah, wah, wah way of thinking, right? I already mentioned Joe Rogan, the degenerate kind of things he does. Stephen Furtick making the church God's uh, God's established institution where people can receive the means of grace, receive the word of God preached, receive Jesus, and making it into, you know, basically a synagogue of Satan. I think it's fair to say that. Taylor Swift, the proverbial overgrown child that sells this dream of just constant relationships and, what goes along with relationships these days, heartbreak, never taking accountability, rinse and repeat, and is called an icon for women to look up to. Megyn Kelly winks at times at degeneracy. Brian Williams was an example of the standard of objective truth with integrity, and yet had his own scandal behind the scenes, so showed himself to be a hypocrite. My purpose in this stream is not to just go after a bunch of people who are easy targets, but rather just to highlight, this is what mostly goes on, and this is what we accept. That's the sad part to me, is when people comment about things like this, they constantly comment, about this almost false dichotomy between business and personal. Well, it's like, well, as long as they do the job right, they can do whatever they want in the background. But it's like, well, no, eventually whatever they're doing in the background is going to affect what they're doing professionally, because we are not, this dichotomous people where we can separate the two. And we've wanted that cake out of a childish idea, actually, a childish mentality. We've wanted to have that cake and eat it too for generations, right? We've been saying that for so many years. I'm not talking about just in the realm of sexuality, but in all sorts of things. We've acted like, you could separate these things, but you just really can't. Yeah, Mike Todd. I don't know if I know who John Hanna is. Maybe that's another pastor. You can let me know. But yeah, there's it's really weird. Yeah. So I always get Mike Todd and Todd White, I guess, mixed up. So I don't know. I've seen Mike Todd, and he's often been wearing super loose stuff to me. But again, it's that concerningly weird kind of loose. That's like you've gone out of your way to be some sort of fashionista, when you should just dress what fits your body normally without being risque. Or out there, right? Be a humble servant of God. Preach the word, particularly if you're a pastor, right? You're not a runway model, Mr. Todd. But yeah, I don't know. Is John Hanna a pastor? So you'll notice the fine work on this thumbnail was a sandbox indicating childishness. Of course, I love a good sandcastle, so I'm not against that or above that, but you get the idea. I think one big thing with maturity and adulthood is putting things in their right place as God has put them, right? So what I'm not talking about is never laugh or never have fun or never be goofy or never do things that are funny and crazy. That's exactly not what I'm talking about. Like I said earlier, I'm talking more about sin. I'm talking about those sorts of things being held to almost like a rattle, like a little child holding onto their rattle and saying, no, I want this. And then the people that are commenting on those things say, well, you got to let them do what you got to let them do. And then they're off the hook. And we become a culture of people letting each other off the hook. It's the commentary and responses around degeneracy that often are so, discouraging at times as well, where it's just like, wow, we'll accept anything. We'll accept anything. It happens a lot, with Donald Trump, right? He does insane things. And I think even the fact that he does so insane things, I still think he's way better than anyone he'd run against in a primary or a general election, because that's how insane the left is. But he is, in many ways, a childish man that's like a bully on the schoolyard. He really is. And I voted for him because he's the better of two bad options in my estimation. but just tweets whatever he thinks, says whatever he thinks. There's no restraint. There's so much pride. And that's not going to be good in certain ways for a people. Of course, it's not. John Hannah is a spicy femme pastor, quote, who it's hard not to side eye because he like, oh, that's weird. Okay. Um, well, I guess Furtick's gonna have to up his game then to keep up with the show. You know what I mean? You got to make it a big show these days. So yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to talk about with this one. Yeah, you guys are all welcome for the thumbnail. That's excellent work as far as I can as far as I can tell. Um, I'm not speaking as someone with this subject, living as a mature Christian in a childish generation, as someone who is excelled necessarily in this area. But what I do see is that there seems to be almost no voice calling for, whatever side of the political or ideological aisle you're on, calling for um, virtuous, measured, self-controlled behavior. That's what is completely lost in our culture, even from those who might even have the truth on their side. Just throw it around mudslinging like a bunch of little kids. And we can easily do that. And I think in the last probably 3 or 4 years, I've noticed, maybe it's just because I've paid more attention, I've noticed that digital media has become a lot more like that. It's become more about the zinger and more about who can deliver the best um, dopamine hit for those who would see it, rather than just what is the truth in this matter, and can we talk about it to some degree in a respectful way. Sometimes we can't, but yeah, that's something I've noticed a lot, and it's started to drive me a bit more crazy, because a lot of times it seems that even people that have a lot of truth, or have at least some measure of truth, you know, what's fast and easy and quick and flashy outdoes, even for them, what is of substance, because they know what's going to get more attention. But if that becomes the standard, then the most things that we get will be things of very little substance, and just things that are going to grab attention. And over time, what will happen is that's the only way that we'll be able to think, right? And I think that's been happening the last 10 years, is we're only able to think now in whatever thing most kind of, hits us with dopamine really quick, or makes the most sense within 5 seconds, or else we're done with it. And that's a very sad thing. Even for people that get things right, it's like, are we delivering in our day-to-day interactions, whether it's online or just, in our lives, are we delivering things that are substantive, and things that are deep, and things that are truthful, and things that are helpful to people for long-term benefit? Or have we joined in the microwave sort of society that we live in? I think about that sometimes, and I hope that's making sense, what I'm saying. But I really do think that this is a problem that no one seems to be calling out, even from political persuasions that I agree with. Um, and part of it is because it's in self-interest, in my estimation. It's in someone's self-interest sometimes these days to be a little childish, right? Might makes right. Whoever's yelling the loudest usually gets what they want. In terms of the online economy, whoever is, probably the throwing the most mud and this and that is going to get the most attention, which therefore will bring in, revenue in a lot of models, these types of things. But what's sacrificed in that, I don't know if it's worth sacrificing, right? And so it's out of self-interest that I think some people fall into the kind of juvenile behavior these days. But if we fight back against it, and we say, no, you are not going to be rewarded against this, and if enough of us stop rewarding it by virtue of what we click on and what we buy, right? Because a lot of things in life, I think, are based on what we click on now, right? That's what moves algorithms. If we stop clicking on slop, then slop will no longer be as needed or relevant or as desired, right? Because the demand is going down, because we've understood that it's terrible, and therefore we don't want it. And so the supply will start going down. And that goes hand in hand with childishness. I want to be someone who does not feed into the demand and therefore supply of childish behavior in our society. I want to be someone who fights for, who supports standards of virtue and truth, and all of these things flow from real godliness. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. I hope I'm not going on just some random rabbit trail with this, but I really do believe, like in this case, and what I'm saying is I don't want um, I don't want my children, my future children, even when they're on the right side of truth, just to be little trolls. Is kind of what I'm saying. Miniature trolls all throughout life that constantly scoff at things that are good and right and true. Um, that's not what I want, and I fear that that's what's happening a lot of times in our culture. So, all that being said, I do think we have a better way forward. Christ likeness leads us to live in the way that David and Jonathan did. They had true friendship, true covenant, long lasting, generationally foresighted, these sorts of concepts. And yet, I'm sure both being made in the image of God, both could laugh at times, both could have fun. There's plenty of that to go around, and if it's in its proper category, we have at it and we enjoy life. Life is awesome because we have Christ. We forget that, right? And so don't let this stream, I'm not here to be a killjoy by any means necessary. I am here for things to be in their proper category. We can have more fun, actually, when we understand what life is really about, and when we're serious about the things we have to be serious about. I really do, believe that. So it's all about proper thinking and proper living according to how God has designed things. And you're talking to someone who's will ever be learning that art this side, of heaven, right? Just like any person, and particularly any Christian. So, yeah, who else is on here? Who else is on here? I know Akila is here, and she has told me about various pastors that wear their pants too tight. And that seems nice, that's a great thing. Tight pants wearing pastors. That's wonderful. The church is in a great state. Anyone else have any comments? I always appreciate them. I just appreciate, I appreciate funny ones. Um, lurking. Lurking. We need more lurkers in society. That's one thing we do need. More lurking. I will support lurking. No creeping, though. Lurking is different than creeping, profoundly different. We know this, right? That's in the Bible. It's somewhere. Don't ask me where, right? But it's got to be in there somewhere, right? So be a lurker and not a creeper. You've heard that. You heard that here first on Wisdom, for the church. Yeah. So adulthood, it affects the way we think about, family. It affects the way we think about the things we let our kids see. It affects the way that we spend our time. All these things, right? They go hand in hand. And when Christ is leading us in these matters, it's amazing the blessings and the results that can come through sanctification, right? It may not always be a material blessing, but we know that we can leave a spiritual inheritance that is, generationally defining, and also of obvious eternal value to our kids, grandkids, kids after them. And that's incredible. Wouldn't it be something if our current group of Christians, youngish or even old, whatever, if we started to emulate a life that was much more like Jonathan and David, adults in the room, even though they're younger, full of adult children, and look what happened. I think that would be a profound thing myself. So all that being said, appreciate those who were here earlier. We'll be here later. Thank you for always for the comments, like that one there. All that being said, thank you for those that end up watching this. Let me know what you think. If you do end up watching this, please like the video. Helps the algorithm. If you think this is good, it moves the algorithm, right? It's going to say, hey, here's something that's not slop, hopefully. And so if we like this, maybe one less sloppy thing will get traction. That's just a quick dopamine hit, and maybe something of some substance. 3 words I'm sure that I said were of some substance. Will get out there, right? And it's all for God's glory. Prayerfully, we're bringing in biblical standards and bringing them to bear on our society, if nothing else, as a convictor of sin, so that people might turn to Christ as we teach the gospel, right? Um, and yes, I mean, I think anyone in our generation was. So, all of us, me included, you don't know what you don't know sometimes, but when the Lord is teaching us and sanctify us, we can be a part of the Lord's work in that. Amen. Amen. And what is grace defined? It's unmerited favor. It's a gift, right? It's incredible. Those who watch this, Christ is a gift. He is the gift. He gave the gift of rescue from our sins and for God's glory by paying the price on the cross. He took God's judgment. He took God's wrath that you and I deserved so that we might have eternal life. It's incredible. Christ is alive now. He's fully and bodily resurrected. He is a real, true man. He's truly God, truly man, and he reigns even now over the world. And he will come to judge the world. He offers you eternal life and a one-day resurrected body in perfection with him. Should you trust him? Today is the day of salvation. Do not wait. You don't know what tomorrow will bring. You don't know necessarily if you'll wake up tomorrow, right? God is in control of those things. And so if you're being convicted to turn to Christ, turn to him now. Trust him. That's what faith is, full weight of your trust. Believe in Jesus and you will be saved, and it will be worth all the hardship, all the suffering, everything that comes with following Christ will all be worth it, because he is far more worth our little childish desires to have what we want all the time, here and now. Christ is greater and more beneficial abundantly than your sin. Please, please, please remember that. Okay, so all that said, I got to get off, and I got to, what do I got to do? I got to play some music to play off here. Which one's going to be? Here. Oh, yeah. All right, well, thank you guys for watching this stream. This is the church. This is what I do next. I think one thing I may do is another stream on Roman Catholicism up here soon. And the reason for that, the song's over. Well, there goes the song. Anyway, the reason for that is I believe that there is a lot, at least from what I've seen, there are a lot of attacks on Protestantism. And Protestantism, of course, no system is perfect. Everything has its weaknesses. But I believe that Protestantism is a true expression of biblical Christianity. We are justified, that is, we are made right legally with God by faith. And Protestants are made fun of a lot by particularly Roman Catholics right now. And I don't think it's always warranted. And so I might do a stream on that, on why I don't think Roman Catholicism is as buttoned up as what the claims are a lot of times. Even if Protestantism do have some things that we have to work through, right? Because there wasn't a protest until 1517 in Wittenberg, Germany. And so that's 1,500 years in church history. But I think I might want to do a stream on that maybe early next week, just to, not to throw mud at Catholics or anything like that, but just to say, hey, I think there are real reasons why some of the tenets of Protestantism are real, and they are according to the faith, right? And they're not in contradiction to the faith that was delivered to the saints. Calvin said, your favorite burnt offering said his favorite prophecy is Deuteronomy 13, 1-5. If you want to write it in here, burnt offering, I'd be interested in you copying and pasting it. That'd be interesting. Calvin Jenkins, print on paper is on its way out. The speed at which his info is processed going faster and faster. Now you can watch a book. Yeah, there's some truth there. Yeah. And it's a good thing in its place, right? I think, again, we didn't know what we didn't know, but it would have been nice, I think, if we could have been more cautious maybe when smartphones came out, that, hey, we don't know exactly how these are going to affect us in every way, so let's not be on these all the time. Let's make measures to where we can actually live life that are not constantly on these things, and that's easier said than done, right? Hindsight is really 2020, but nonetheless, it definitely has taken a toll on us as a people. The music is always way louder than you talk. That's probably true. Protestantinople. Oh, that's got to be on a shirt. That's got to be on a shirt. Protestantinople. That is awesome. And your daughter sounds smart. I wish I was saying that when I was a kid. I wouldn't have even had either of those words in my vocabulary, unfortunately. Um, Burnt offering. If you're still here, where are you from? Where are you from? Same Calvin. If you're still here, where are you from, my friend? Or are you just popping in, popping out? If you are, then that's okay. But I am severely hurt emotionally. That's all I'm going to say about that. So other than that, it's fine. Protestantinople. Now that's great. That's great. What a dreamland. City of God type stuff. There's no way. I don't think I can see like super previous comments. Oh yeah, now I can. I have the scroll thing. Did I miss any good comments? Sometimes there's some funny ones that I miss. Yeah. This was not one of my favorites. The flying spaghetti monster is my Lord and Savior, otherwise known as a false god. Unfortunately, the good old J Bev, who's clearly, I'm sure, asleep at this point, given his work schedule, said it was a very mature subject earlier. I cannot thank you enough, Big John Bevins, as you're known. Up at the top near the beginning, quite an inappropriate comment, which I will not say on here. But yeah, nonetheless, I think that is all I have for this stream. Thank you very much for being here, and I will see you next time, probably early in the week, to talk a little bit more about Catholicism and Protestantism on Wisdom for the Church. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time, and really, to play some music off.